going to be talking about a trip that I recently went on this past September. This trip was actually my third time going to the same destination. I have been going there with my cousin, my uncle, and a few other people for the past couple of years every September, working on more of a longer form documentary series that I'm not really discussing too much right now, but I definitely think it's an incredible place and it's just such a unique experience that I really wanted to kind of capture something just to kind of share that experience and some of those landscapes and some of those little moments in between with everyone else that you guys can kind of enjoy from the comfort of your own home. And with the focus of this video, I just wanted to introduce you to the characters who you may be seeing. So first up, we have kind of the main focus of the video just because of the overall focus of fly fishing in this video, and that's Evan. And then that would be followed by his older brother, Lucas, who's a major proponent in my main documentary series. And then we got Johnny, who is the brother of Lucas's girlfriend. And last but not least, we have John, who is my uncle and the father of Lucas and Evan. I was actually invited to go on this trip 3 years ago for the first time, and that's where I kind of decided on a very specific angle of how I wanted to document it. The first time I went, I documented it with a Leica and a 28, as well as a Hasselblad with the 80 shooting all color. So that was kind of my deciding factor. And after that first trip, I kind of had to decide on a system just because I felt like the body of work was too split down the middle with having two completely different looks, with a 35mm image in all black and white, and especially with how I like my black and whites compared to medium format color. It was just such a different approach with all of them, not just with that as well, but even just how you're using the cameras. Well, the Leicas, you can be a bit more quick, you're getting more shots on the roll. It definitely makes sense in a more of a documentary approach, but I just felt like the Hasselblad was a better fit for the area. It really gets the colors coming through, which is one of my favorite things about the area. And it's just such a good system that I enjoy using. And on top of that, a lot of the work does kind of revolve more around the slower moments, more of the portraits of the people, and more of the still moments that happen throughout this trip, and not so much kind of catching action as it's going by. And that was the main reason why I did land on the Hasselblad. And then I also added a 50mm on top of the 80, so I have around a 25 and a 40-50-ish equivalent in the field, which to me, that if I have those two lenses and I can get close enough, that's really all I need. And that kit's been working out really well. The first year definitely had some kind of growing pains with me trying to get used to it, as well as fly fishing at the same time, so I felt a little bit distracted that time. But this year I made much more of an effort just to remain completely focused on documenting the trip, and I was really happy with the quality of work that I came back with. And also, the film that I've been using for this project so far in terms of color has always been Portra 400. It's just super versatile, I know I'm gonna get, and I'm just overall happy with the results. How this trip works is on a Thursday night, we meet up at around 7, we load up the trucks, and then we drive all through the night, going all completely north, a couple hours north actually of Thunder Bay. Total drive time, it's around 12-13 hours once you add in all those stops for food or gas. It's just right through the night, taking shifts driving. But even though it's a long drive in the middle of the night, it's definitely still very exciting for all of us. I think it's not something that will ever really get old, because we all know what's at the end of the trip and we all get so excited for that experience. And that's what makes the trip so successful. So everyone has their own kind of personal interests, but at the same time we all have this common feeling of wanting to be outdoors and wanting to just kind of enjoy each other's company and kind of taking it day by day. It's such a refreshing take. It's such a strong mental reset that I think a lot of people need. If you've ever gone camping for a long time, it feels very similar to that, just kind of taken a bit more to the extreme. So at the end of the drive, we end up at an airport, if you want to call it that. It's actually just a couple float planes that kind of sit in the water. One cool fact is the plane that we actually fly in on was from the Vietnam War, and then it was bought, outfitted for more hunting parties or people that just want to go camping. It's basically just like a small cargo plane where we can go on, we can load up all our gear for the 7 to 10 days that we're there, and it takes off right off the water, lands on the water, and we're good to go. And flying at this low of an altitude, you definitely get to see how far the trees and lakes go on, and it's honestly endless. And it's really cool because we tend to stay in the same area just because my uncle and my cousins are a lot more familiar with the area, so it makes a lot more logistical sense. But just to kind of think of how many different areas and the endless possibilities that are there in seemingly untouched land is always incredible to see. So after the plane lands, we drag up the plane closer to the shore, and then we quickly unload all our gear. And then after that, the pilot just kind of takes off. I remember the first time I did it, it was definitely an interesting feeling where you're just sitting there on the beach with all your stuff, and all of a sudden, the plane that dropped you off is kind of like, yep, see you in a week. And it leaves you with a really cool feeling because that's all you have, and you have to make the best of it. And for 3 years now, it's been a blast, and it's something I look forward to every year. Probably one of the most fun parts about this whole area too is the fishing is absolutely pristine. If you can't catch a fish there, there's no chance you can catch a fish anywhere else. In this area, it's all northern pike and pickerel. And after we set up camp, we went down to some rapids that we usually have some pretty good success. And that is where we actually each caught our first fish. And then I also took some time just to photograph Evan fly fishing off this really nice boulder on this first evening.
Rest of the trip.
So while the fishing is great, the camping is great, the landscape is beautiful, and overall it's just a ton of fun, it's always important to remember that the main focus why we are going on that trip is for moose hunting. It's a tradition that's been in John's family for years, and now Lucas has been doing it for a couple years as well as the tradition kind of continues on. So with that, it definitely makes for some early mornings, which is always really cool because this landscape changes so drastically with all the temperatures. But regardless, we were still getting up early because that is the best chance you're gonna have of seeing a moose. And for me, that's always awesome because that means I'm gonna be getting up when the sun is rising, and that's gonna mean better photos for me. So as you can see, we woke up to the most beautiful sunrise. It was just super foggy. The sky had a tint of pink throughout it. And we were just kind of going along the shorelines, paddling in this canoe really quietly and slowly, just as we're kind of cutting right through the fog that's everywhere. And I was just kind of like rattling off frames, just like loving every second of it. Luckily, as we were kind of looking around, I looked over into one bay and I spotted a massive bull, just huge. And after we got to shore, we kind of like crept up as close as we could just so we could have a good, easy visual for it. And that's where John actually started doing some moose calls. And right when he did, it was the coolest thing because the moose instantly reacted. It looked up, it walked over towards us, like as close as it could, right in this kind of bay of water. And then right from there, it kind of just went in and started swimming across directly to where we were. And this thing was absolutely huge. They unfortunately didn't actually have a tag for a bull, so we didn't really do anything. We were just kind of like watching it and just kind of like seeing where it was going. But in that whole like lighting setup with that fog, it was absolutely perfect. I was sitting there with the Hasselblad on John with the bull in the background, and honestly I froze up at that moment. I just wasn't sure, do I take the photo? Because we know that the Hasselblad shutter isn't the quietest thing in the world, and I don't want to risk kind of ruining an opportunity when, again, photos aren't the main focus of this trip. So after that excitement, we actually decided to do some fishing at another dam that we know is probably the best fishing spot in this whole area. The rapids come down and there's a huge pool, and it's basically every cast you're throwing in a rod there, you're going to be pulling something out. Unless you're fly fishing. Fly fishing there is a lot more difficult just because the current was so incredibly fast. It was really hard to get those flies down, even with weighted sinking lines. But one of the coolest things about actually getting to this dam is you have to go through this whole moss covered area, I guess just from the spray of the water brushing up on the rocks and the trees in the area. It's covered in this whole green moss, which just looks incredible. Another weird thing to note is in all this footage, it's gonna look like we're pretty warm. Maybe we're in a sweater, maybe just a long sleeve shirt. Usually it's absolutely freezing. Usually we're like layered up, we have big jackets on, we have gloves on. We're doing everything in our power just to usually kind of stay warm, at least for me. And one of those things is water is always a big danger with that, because if you get water in your rubber boot, your feet are gonna be wet all day and you're gonna be miserable, they're gonna be very cold, and things don't dry very easily when it's that cold out. And because of the warmth, I was actually more comfortable kind of walking into the water, which made fishing in some areas really fantastic. We found this one bay where we'd usually just kind of like drive the boat through, but I guess we just decided to try and fish it this time. And we were pulling out pike like crazy. So we called it like the Pike place, and kind of as much as possible we would go there and just kind of go in a circle in the boat, or go on the waders, or just kind of stand on a rock, and we would just be casting flies constantly, and we would just be pulling in pike one after another, which was such an awesome experience. I used to hate catching pike before this just because they're so slimy, but after this trip, they're definitely one of my favorite fish to fish for. One of the evenings I actually kind of had to myself, which was kind of nice. It was a nice reset. You are with these people all day, all night, so it's nice to kind of like get a break from everything. So I just kind of like took a canoe out, and then I just kind of paddled around the area that we mainly stay in, and just kind of hung out, contemplated the whole trip, thought a little bit about the photos I was doing, and just kind of took my time and looked for some nice moments that I wanted to capture just as the sun was kind of going down.
Here, I'll show you what's in the pack. Think Tank Retrospective 5. I just have some fly tippet on here, little snips. Everything's basically all in one bag. This side pouch, Portra electrical tape in case the adhesive wears out, and then the rain cover for this bag. And then behind here I have some fishing leaders. Start with the front pocket here. Fishing tackle for the spin reel, and then flies with the fly rod and some jigs. Another thing of just some cheap flies off Amazon. Light meter. This thing's actually cracked right here. Gotta fix that when I get home. And then on the inside I have the Hasselblad 50 F4. I don't use it too much. Also the back cap's extremely loose. Probably use it for like 10 to 20% of the shots. Put that carefully. I have the tried and true, the Hasselblad 500 cm with the 80 2.8. And on the inside I have the AccuMat with the split prism down the middle, just to make sure I'm hitting perfect focus with all of that, but never gets old looking through that. And then just one extra back. Haven't gone through too many rolls this year so far, but I'm just kind of trying to fill the blanks of what I already know, what I have from the previous years, and not trying to overshoot the same type of shot. But it doesn't really get old looking at this kind of stuff.
So one of the funny things was throughout the trip, Evan and myself were just trying to go for the biggest pike as possible. We were using like massive flies. We were casting them out as hard as we could, trying to hit every bay. We would basically just kind of comb the shorelines, just go in everywhere and trying to get one of these monsters to bite the flies. And while we got some pretty big pike, we didn't actually come home with the title. That title would actually go to Lucas. Twice, kind of. One evening, Lucas and I were just kind of going out fishing. He was kind of just puttering me along basically as I worked on my casting and getting it out and trying to find these pike. And he had a spin reel with him, and I was working on my back cast on this really nice cove. As I'm letting the line out on my back cast and I'm casting it out, Lucas, just with like a flick of his wrist, throws a spoon out, and within 3 or 4 cranks, as we land right next to each other, he gets smashed by the biggest pike I've ever seen in my life. It was... These photos honestly don't do it justice. Like, it was so big, I couldn't believe it. Like, we were wondering how we're even gonna get it into the boat, how we're gonna get a photo of it, how we're gonna get the hook out of it. Just, it was a logistical nightmare with how big this fish was.
Holy shit! Holy! This thing is heavy.
Oh, you have pliers?
Yeah.
I'm putting this thing inside.
There. You called the bay and everything.
Yeah, as you said, I have no more faith in bays. Size of this thing. Holy!
Oh my god!
You said you wanted a little bit of a girth on this thing.
Luckily, Lucas knows what he's doing, and he's a strong guy, and even seeing him pick it up and realizing how heavy that fish was incredible. I was speechless. So after a quick photo, we quickly threw it back in and kind of continued out, and that ignited kind of the race for everyone on trying to catch a bigger pike. Evan and myself didn't really get that close. I think we capped out at around 33 or so inches between us two. And then on the last day, Lucas actually goes out and catches another one on the way back in a different area. And I believe his biggest of that trip was 41 inches, which was just insane. So I think Evan and I were pretty disappointed we didn't get any monster pikes on the fly, but I think for the next time we go on this trip, we'll definitely be a little bit more prepared with how big of a fly to use, because we were realizing, like, even with like a 6-inch fly, we need to have something much bigger in order to attract these fish. And ever since I started fly fishing, it's usually always been like a solo thing for me, so it was really cool on this trip to actually fly fish with someone who has that interest. And on top of that, Evan's a much more experienced fisherman, so being able to just kind of like watch him and like see how he casts, how he's fighting the fish, it honestly improved my ability so much. Especially early on, I kept kind of losing fish after that first initial take, and he was kind of like talking me through how to fight them better. And by the end of it, I think it really helped in terms of just controlling the fish, controlling the line, the rod, everything like that. I just felt a lot more confident throughout it. So it was really cool to photograph those interactions between father and son on like a fishing trip. It was a beautiful day. John was the hero of that day by motoring us around and just kind of like letting us do our thing. And we ended up with some nice fish that day as well. In this area, they actually have another boat that's just kind of hidden in the forest that lets us go up to another lake without having to portage the boat. However, we did realize that there was a hole in it, so we had to figure out a way how to patch it. Luckily, we did have some patch kits, but to actually use the patch kits, what we did is we took a burner camp stove type thing and kind of heated up the metal of the boat, heated up the patch, and John and Evan kind of took care of that. I just kind of watched and took photos, but it was really cool just to see them kind of improvise and just see father and son work on something like that after a whole day of kind of fishing together as well. I think that's one of my favorite things about this trip too, is because you only have what's readily accessible to you or what you brought, you really have to learn how to improvise. It's very simple to kind of come up to a boat like that, see a hole, and then be like, okay, well, that's done. We can't use it. There's nothing else we can do. We may as well head back. But in these kind of instances where it's just you and there's no easy way to YouTube how to do it or call someone up or search it online, it's really up to you, your previous experiences, and any kind of logic that you have and you want to bring to the table on how something can be fixed and how you can make the better of a situation, even though it may not seem like there is a solution readily available. And I think that's a really strong mental reset that I get with this trip, because whenever I return home, I always feel like I kind of bring that mentality with me, and then I'm that much more resilient to any other kind of trials and tribulations that'll come my way for the next little while. So not to be confused with my uncle, this was John's first trip coming out with us, and a couple days into the trip, Lucas was actually teaching him how to moose call. And he actually got the chance to test that out as well, which was pretty incredible. Me and John were fishing up in one little area of the lake, and when we were just sitting there fishing, we hear a huge crunch coming from the forest, and instantly we quickly snap a look at each other because you can tell there's something in there. So he decides to try out his moose call, and instantly, as soon as he finishes the call, we hear the crunching pick up, get closer, so we can tell that it was probably a bull that is now coming out of the forest to come and see what was calling towards it. And then right before we kind of get our paddles ready to get to the shore, now that we know it is a moose, right away we turn around and we just see a huge rack and a moose just pop out of the forest, like so quick. It was just such a cool moment. It was looking dead straight at us, and it probably couldn't even see us because we were so dead on. But then after it kind of turned its head, it saw us, it sat there for a bit, and then wandered off into the forest. And we tried to bring it out again. We didn't have any luck with that, but overall it was just such a cool experience, especially after being so lucky previously in the trip with the 3 moose the first morning, seeing the black bear, and now seeing another moose like this. It was so awesome to see, and I'm really glad he got that opportunity to kind of interact with an animal like that as well. But through a lot of these photos, I know a lot of them are going to seem like they're in the same setting, but that's really what this trip was. It was a lot of kind of like hanging out on the water, being in boats, fishing, just kind of going up and down the lakes, exploring different bays, just seeing what kind of fish we could catch. And honestly, I wouldn't have changed it at all. Like the weather, well, it wasn't very good for hunting. It was unreal for fishing, and kind of being able to spend a longer day being comfortable out there, which was so much fun. And it's honestly a trip that I look forward to every year, and it provides so many experiences and lessons and just memories that I don't think are easily replaced with any other kind of trip. Towards the later end of the trip, I actually had the Hasselblad jam on me, which was extremely disappointing. I just had it recently serviced. I'm not sure what it was. I think it had to do with me switching lenses so often, and maybe they weren't caulked all the way or something like that. The barn doors would open so I could see in it, but the lens wouldn't come off and it wouldn't let me advance. And honestly, at that moment in time, I was pretty disappointed. The light was really nice still, and I thought the whole trip was going to be done at that point in terms of taking photos, because I thought the camera wasn't going to be good until I brought it back and got it serviced again. So I remembered that if you looked into the back of the Hasselblad, you could actually see a very small, almost like a screwdriver slit, and you needed a tool that you could buy that would perfectly fit, and then you can actually crank it open. And when you actually crank it, it resets everything in the camera. It makes sure the lens is wound, the body is wound, so that they can actually come apart. I kind of just had to keep going with that mentality of fixing the boat, of this is all we have, make it work. Is there any other solution that you can find? You can't YouTube it. I can't call up someone to service it. What are you going to do to better the situation? And with that, I actually have to highlight probably the most important piece of kit I had out there that whole week, aside from my camera and my fly fishing gear, was this. And this is just a Leatherman. It's a Leatherman Wave model. It is just a multi-tool. It has pliers, it has a saw, a knife, file, screwdrivers, just random stuff that you can kind of use when you're out in the field. And the reason it was so important is because with just that tool and a metal coat hanger, I was actually able to fashion the tool myself in order to rewind the Hasselblad in the field and make it work for the rest of the trip, and I've yet to have an issue. They definitely all had their doubts as they saw me sitting by the fire, just kind of like whittling away at the edge of a coat hanger, but just made sure I was filing it fine enough where it would just fit perfectly. So I was lucky, it worked out. Put it in the back of the Hasselblad, very slowly just kind of like turned it, cranked it just the right amount, and the Hasselblad was good to go. And before we knew it, the trip was kind of over. We're already back on the beach, our gear's all unloaded, and we're just waiting for that pilot to land where he dropped us off a week before. And that's basically the whole trip. I hope it kind of gave you guys a pretty good idea of what the experience is like, and I hope it also sheds a little bit of light on my approach to documentary in this actual environment. I know with documentary, a lot of the times people can think it has to be very fast and quick and making sure you're getting all these very specific moments, but with the way things flow there, I didn't really feel like that was the proper approach. I feel like I kind of wanted to take a step back and almost have a slower approach as well. Well, I could go out there and shoot hundreds and thousands of frames and kind of narrow them down from there. I wanted to be much more conscious about what I was shooting and being more specific about what I thought I needed or what moments really mattered, especially because I know it's such a longer term project. I didn't want to rush it and kind of gather a whole bunch of frames really quick. I like the ability to kind of go through each year's set of images and know what works and slowly see the idea take form, because originally I had a very different idea for the project, and as year by year it's kind of flowed into different states, and I think I'm getting very close to having a focus on the project, but the idea of having tons of photos or shooting everything doesn't really appeal to me for this specific project. And I think it was rather discouraging at first because I felt like I wasn't shooting enough, but if I look at some of my favorite photographers, if you look at like Sally Mann or Alex Soth, like they were able to create documentary projects on like large format. So shooting it on medium format is much easier than that, and they create beautiful work. And man, I think it's more about the mentality that you go into it with. If you go in there with a large format camera, or in my case a Hasselblad, and you're trying to shoot everything, there's going to be problems. It's not going to be doable. It's not fast enough. It can't keep up. Well, you can't shoot fast with it. You're doing yourself a disservice with that kind of gear. But if you go into it with that approach of kind of not trying to catch the frames, but trying to find them, trying to know when they're coming. I think it was with this year that all changed, where it finally clicked that I stopped racing around and I stopped trying to capture everything, and I said, okay, what are the moments that I need? What are the moments that matter? That's just a little bit of my mindset behind my approach with this series and how I'm kind of trying to change my angle, especially when shooting with the Hasselblad. It was definitely a very important lesson in terms of documentary photography for me specifically, and it's definitely something I'm looking forward to kind of continuing with as I move forward through all my documentary type of work. I hope this little window into the Canadian North encourages you guys to kind of get out there, whether it's camping, whether it's just going for a hike, whatever it may be. I think it's something that we could all use more of, and I think you guys will all enjoy it if it's not something you do already. But that all out of the way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.
Okay, guys.
All right.
Here we go.